Well, Curt Cignetti and Indiana football crushed the transfer portal going into 2025. We'll give them some grades. Plus, what are they doing in the 2026 recruiting class?
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. It is the Locked On Hoosiers podcast. I'm your man, Jacob Goins. I appreciate you being here, making this your first listen or your first watch every single day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you so much for being here, making this your first go-to spot for all things Indiana athletics. Joining me on this Friday edition of the show is Brian Smith, our Locked On recruiting expert, joining us to talk Indiana recruits in 2026. A couple of names you need to know, plus what Indiana can use from this past year's success to get some of the biggest names in that recruiting class. But first, talk about some portal grades for Indiana football after the December window has wrapped up. More coming in the spring in just a little bit. But Brian, I think Indiana did a pretty good job at getting some big-time names and some starters out of that December portal window.
Well, first off, you got a quarterback that fits the basic offense that Cignetti and his crew ran this past year. Intermediate to mid-range, they really went with precision passing last year. And there aren't many guys like that in college. Well, the guy that I got to see firsthand and destroy a lot of other teams was Mendoza, and that's who Indiana got. So I'm like, they found the right guy for their offense. Now the question is how many guys are going to have to catch it? How many guys can they expand? They had a lot of juniors and seniors, as you well know. So I thought Tyler Morris, the receiver they brought in from Michigan, let's be honest. Michigan's quarterback play last year, kind of like a goat throwing a football. It just wasn't very effective.
Right.
Tyler still had over 20. He would have had 50 catches in a lot of offenses. He's going down to Bloomington, and that's a kid I scouted in high school. He's out of Chicago. They got Holden Stays, former Notre Dame and Tennessee tight end, really athletic after the catch. I think offensively, the skill talent will excite the common fan, where I'm still not sure yet. There's some different guys that it could end up working out. How does the offensive and defensive line? That's more about chemistry and the fit. I need to see a little more of that, but I'm happy about the skill. And by the way, the wee BB kid, he was a very effective player, and it's not like he's playing behind elite offensive linemen. I believe he was at UAB.
Yeah.
He's another guy. I looked up his stats on Pro Football Focus, 5'10", 220, really good zone runner. Indiana runs a lot of that stuff to the outside. They do a great job with it. Like these guys fit the same profile of what they did last year. The reason they got doinked in the playoff was line play. They couldn't run the ball quite as well. They just didn't have enough talent. D-line didn't have as much depth. I think other than that, to be really honest with you, Indiana's ahead of the curve. I didn't think they would be at this point towards the end of the second window, which there's another 10-day window in spring. So I'm pretty happy for the Hoosiers.
Yeah, Indiana goes and gets two offensive linemen, one from Colorado, one from Ohio State. Big name, right? Coming from Columbus to Bloomington. Also, Roman Hemby, the Maryland running back, is stepping in there. It feels like Indiana got a lot of the same type of players, as you were saying, just kind of upgraded them and made them better from what they had a year ago from a playoff team.
Yeah, like Dominic Radcliffe, 6'3", 285. He played, I believe, at Texas State. Like some of these guys, you're like, well, who are these guys? It's the same thing they did last year, Liberty and schools like that. Nobody really knew what to expect, but they knew the system. They came in and they fit together and they wanted to be a part of a team. I think that the biggest thing that Cignetti did with his crew last year is they didn't go after the name. They went after the team concept. They would take a player slightly lower as long as they were willing to be a part of the team, which I am all for. And ironically, it's a lot like what Bob Knight used to do back in the day. He didn't always have the most talented teams, but he would outwork you.
Sure.
It's the same concept. And I think that's a great way to do it. And football is the ultimate team sport anyway. So 2 linemen, I would not be remiss if I didn't say they could probably use 1 or 2 more on the offensive side because depth. Look at the Ohio State Notre Dame game. Both of them were deep into their bench by the time they got to the title game. You need more depth there. And you could probably use more depth at defensive line too. So I'm not sure how it's going to end up, but right now, Indiana is a program that's trending towards building a better foundation instead of a bunch of one and dones. They got a few kids that got more than 1 year of eligibility. And I know we'll get into high school recruiting in a little bit, but this kind of stuff is going to help them build the high school ranks, which is ultimately how you have a long-term successful program.
And on the defensive side of the football, Indiana's bringing back 2 All-Americans, Aiden Fisher in the linebacker room and Derik Ponds in the secondary. But the guys in the secondary that you bring in through the portal, Louis Moore from Ole Miss and also Devin Boykin from NC State, you're talking power 4 guys again, Brian. That's the difference. Instead of your group of 5s and FCS, you're going to get power 4 guys. And I like those 2 really, really well. A lot, really.
Yeah. It's fine-tuning, like, off the field stuff, because I cover Florida State and they took a whole bunch of SEC like Georgia and Alabama kids last year. Hardly any of them panned out. And they're all 4 and 5-star guys out of high school. Sometimes kids don't want to put in the work after they reach the next level. Doesn't mean they don't have more talent. But Cignetti and his crew have figured out which ones do the right things. How he does that, I do not know. It worked, though.
In today's era, too. Today's era.
Yeah, I know. Of all time. I mean, that is an incredible thesis that somebody needs to figure out and sit down with Cignetti, because there had to be something when they were interviewing these kids and talking to them that they figured out. Their success rate last year was insane for the poor. Like, it was literally insane. I'm sure that Florida State would have liked to have had it because theirs was just the opposite. It plummeted to the bottom of the well. So that's why they won 2 games. If you're going to be successful, you got to understand the back office stuff, all the little details, academically, socially. Where are they with? Is it a me guy that's looking for a bag? And they've done it. So again, just a few more linemen, and I think high school recruiting's on the uptick. They're to the point now where the only thing they really have to do is break through and win a playoff game. And with the facilities that they've now got, they've improved them. They've got more NIL money than most people have an idea. Like, I went to school there. They got a lot of money. This could be a long-term program. Do they want to do that? Well, that's going to be partially up to the boosters, but Cignetti could have left and he stayed. So all those things are very positive to me. And I think Indiana football is going to be around for quite a while towards the upper half of the Big Ten.
If you had to give it a grade on what they did in the December window, and I guess kind of building in what they could end up doing in the next 10-day spring window, what would that letter be? What would you say Indiana's success rate was in terms of a letter grade from the portal window back in December?
I would give it a B. It's not complete yet, but I think that's by design, because he wasn't going to just grab bag. The players that he got, going through, looking at stats, knowing a few of them, I'm like, okay, but they don't have a wow guy. And to be honest, because of I don't know how much you've studied it, the house settlement being in the back half of next year, and there's more. This is not a good portal year. A lot of people are spending their money on the portal to keep guys to stay, kind of like Ohio State did. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame did it to a certain degree too, with Riley Mills and some of those guys. There's not as many guys, but he didn't go out and just take whoever was next and waste cash either. It's best to keep that money for recruiting and your own roster, have it wholesome. So right now I give it a B, but they do need to add a couple more pieces. I'd like to see one on each side of the ball. You're like, oh, okay, that's a kid that could start at Michigan. That's a kid that could start at Penn State. And if they do that, why couldn't Indiana win at least 8 games again next year? Again, you got a quarterback, you got skill players. They're pretty close. So now the only thing against them, when we talk about this off air, everybody's going to circle Indiana now because they were on the sky. It used to be the other way around. You're like, oh, it's just Indiana, we're going to beat them.
Right.
But now the Hoosiers are a team that's, coming off a season that won 11 games. So it'll be a little harder.
Yeah, we're not hiding from anybody anymore, and expectations are through the roof in Bloomington. You mentioned a magical word, recruiting, and Indiana is starting to do that in 2026. We'll talk about a couple of key names, especially here in the Hoosier State, plus how Indiana can build off of all of that we just talked about to make 2026 successful. We'll have that for you coming up next right here on Locked On Hoosiers. Today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers is brought to you by Game Time. Attending NFL playoff games is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, and the connection with other fans are unmatched. I remember the thrill of seeing my favorite team clinch a playoff win live. It's been a couple of years, but it's a memory that I'll never forget. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters, being there. I've used Game Time several times for tickets to sporting events, concert that I'm going to coming up next month. My parents use it. Even my grandparents can use it. That's how simple and effective that it is. They've got their Game Time Picks feature, the all-in pricing feature if you toggle it, and the views from your seat. There's no reason to go anywhere else than on Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back into Locked On Hoosiers. Appreciate you being here. Also appreciate Brian Smith, our Locked On recruiting expert, IU grad, joining us on the show today as well. And we just graded the portal additions for Indiana in December and hoping that they add a few more coming up in the spring. But recruiting, high school recruiting, that is, never, ever sleeps. And you know this better than anybody. And Indiana starting to gain some traction in the recruiting trail, especially right here in the state, where I think Curt Cignetti is old school enough to realize and still believe high school recruiting, Brian, that's where you win championships.
If you look at the teams that made the Final Four, specifically on the offensive line, all but like one offensive lineman that was starting was a high school recruit for Penn State, Texas, Ohio State, Notre Dame.
Boom.
Coincidence? No. No. That's 1 out of 20. So you have to look at it and say homegrown at certain positions. Like receivers, it's a little more different, if you will. But like offensive line in particular, I think you need to do well. And I know Indiana's not an incredible state for recruiting, but Indianapolis, I just tweeted this off my X handle, that city in particular, Indiana has to do a better job of consistently getting players from there. Arguably 2 or 3 of the top players in the state are from Indy next year. J.J. Finch, a defensive lineman from Warren Central. Shocker that Warren Central's got a good defensive lineman.
True.
Yeah. Who knew? Kazmir Hicks, a defensive back, and along with Mike Campbell, another DB/athlete from Decatur Central, 2 more kids out of Indy. Just those kids alone. Like if they were to get those 3 guys, it would change momentum in the state, because Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame, Penn State, they come into the state and they rate it. Michigan State sometimes too. And Penn State, of all positions, because they're terrible at it, has a commitment from a receiver from Fort Wayne right now. Like, why would anybody go to Penn State to play wide receiver?
Why? All they do is transfer out. That's all they do is leave. They go other places and have great careers.
I don't know. Maybe he thinks he's going to go in and start, which right now that might be true.
True.
But anyway, his name is Jerquaden Guilford. He's from Northrop, another prominent program in Fort Wayne. You have to get those kind of kids to stay home. Indiana has a major advantage right now. Notre Dame doesn't recruit much in state. Purdue is god-awful.
Terrible.
They are bad. I'm obviously not a Purdue fan, but that's not they need to be better than they are. It helps Indiana if they're a little better. But right now, you shouldn't lose many recruiting battles to them.
Sure.
So they have that going for them. And then the other thing is Indiana's always been able to pluck a few kids from Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois. Well, that should just continue, but with a higher level of recruit. And the other bonus, Ohio State, I've even had somebody at Ohio State staff tell me they take a lot of flack from the local coaches in the state of Ohio because they recruit so much out of state now. There's a lot of ruffled feathers there, and that's, it's a political thing. But Jeremiah Smith lived in Fort Lauderdale. They were going to go get him, okay? I understand. So that's part of it. Maybe they can steal a couple more kids from Cincinnati, etc. I think Indiana's got a chance to be a top 25 class this year because of what they're selling. What were they, correct me if I'm wrong, top 5 in like 3 or 4 categories offensively last year? It was incredible. Yeah. It shouldn't be very hard to sell the offense at bare minimum. And defensively, they had a lot of key juniors and seniors. They can sell playing time too. Why can't Indiana have a top 25 class? I see no reason. So we'll see if they can get it done. But pay attention to the junior days coming up. Who actually shows up compared to, oh, I think I'm going to go visit Bloomington. Do they physically make it down there? That will be your tipping point. Okay, if he came to the junior day, there's a really good chance he'll take an OV to Bloomington as well.
And I'll say this too, right? Commitments, a verbal commitment right now is just so iffy. I mean, you really, how much stock can you really put in that, especially for somebody in the next recruiting cycle? I mean, there can so much that can happen between, let's say it happens today versus the next year that they're going to be recruited. I mean, there's more offers, there's more visits, there's more money. And so those things come into play. And I think Indiana, people still seem to think this is true, and I just don't think it is. Indiana doesn't have an NIL problem. Indiana is fine on the NIL front, and I wish more people would get that in their brains, Brian.
Well, they think of it that way because Indiana has been horrible at football for the most of its.
Yeah.
So they just assume they don't spend. They have cash. That is not a problem for basketball too. That's a whole nother entity I'll let you take care of later in this show. I don't want any.
Oh, I will.
And it's just a matter now that not only do they have cash, they have cachet because, Indiana, they went to the playoff. Oh, Indiana had a bunch of juniors and seniors. I can play early and get paid. Once they see the campus, like I'm biased because I went to school there. Right. You see the campus, you see the facilities 20 years ago were pretty good, but the football team wasn't. Now, like the weight room and all that was dope.
Yep.
But now they are actually putting some plaques on the wall. It shouldn't be very hard to sell. The NIL number will kind of grow in terms of its popularity once they get the first big name recruit to commit. Somebody will know, he ain't going there unless he got paid. They need that guy. I don't know where he's going to be from. Could be an Atlanta kid, could be a San Antonio kid, could be Chicago, whatever. When they get their first out-of-state recruit that's like a 4-star, that'll open some eyes. They'll get more credibility for it. I guarantee it.
It's like a domino effect because then when one kid commits, it's the others that turn their head and say, wait a minute, why did he go there? Not just talking about Indiana. I think that happens all over the place, man. I think it's because they all talk, they all are on social media, and it spreads immediately. And so everybody starts to say, wait a minute, why is he going to Indiana? Maybe I should go check that out. Maybe I should go see and get a piece of that action. And then at that point, you get them on campus, and it's the classic, if we get them here, we feel confident that we can get them to commit and we can lock them down to come to Indiana. And I think the staff has great relations with the recruits that I've talked to or heard from. They love the staff that's currently at Indiana.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem. Everything you said is on the mark. I was speaking to Keyshawn Henderson the other day. He's top recruit, arguably in the country from the Houston area. And I was talking to him about, hey, these coaches, they come and go. Somebody offers big money, they leave. You got to look at broad picture. That's what recruits do. Keyshawn's a smart kid, but I was just talking to him about it, and I'm like, everybody's cognizant that there's a lot of moving parts with recruiting now. And the NIL is part of it. Have you won recently? Do you have coaches that can develop? These kids are much more savvy than they were even 5 years ago. It's not even competitive because there's so much more information. I think the NIL thing for Indiana will spread quickly, and they're going to surprise some people. And it's not out of the question. Indiana is the biggest surprise in recruiting nationally this year because of the season they had in 2024.
Well, hopefully they can use that to build in the recruiting class. 2025 was solid. We hope 2026 is good as well, and it takes more results on the field. He is Brian Smith, our Locked On recruiting expert, IU grad. Always appreciate having him on with his great insight. Indiana basketball, we're back in action this weekend. Unfortunately, we're on our home floor inside of Assembly Hall. Will the Boo Birds be out against Maryland? We'll give you a full preview breakdown coming up next on our final segment right here on Locked On Hoosiers. All right, final segment here on Locked On Hoosiers. Welcome back into the Friday edition of the show. Thank you so much to Brian Smith joining us, our recruiting expert, talking all things Indiana football. But we flip to the final segment of the show, talking a little bit of basketball as Indiana is back home inside of Assembly Hall, and we now have Maryland coming to town Sunday afternoon, a Maryland team that I think is probably one of the most underrated squads in the Big Ten. and possibly in all of college basketball. This is a team that will be coming off at least one win, possibly two, right? They beat Nebraska last Sunday. If it makes you feel any better, Hoosier fans, they couldn't beat Northwestern either. Doesn't take away the fact that we're 0-5 against them in Mike Woodson's tenure talking about Northwestern, but I digress. We can forget about that. Maryland will have played Illinois last night. As of this recording, that game had not happened yet, so we'll react to what we know so far. And that's that Maryland is a really good team. They are a really talented team. They have over 5 guys that average double digits on the season in all of their losses. Northwestern by 2 in overtime. Oregon on the road by 4. Washington on the road by 6 there on the West Coast. Their game at Purdue, they lost by 5. And the game against Marquette all the way back in November, they lost by just 4. This Maryland team is really, really good. And the times that they haven't won, they've been right there the entire time. And some of their wins are really, really impressive. Dominated UCLA when they were a ranked team. Dominated Syracuse, which, ACC is kind of terrible. They beat Villanova. They beat Ohio State. Not just beat Ohio State, they embarrassed the Buckeyes 83-59. They bring high-flying offense, elite defense, and just pure athleticism into Assembly Hall on Sunday afternoon, and they're walking away the 69-66 winners over Nebraska. Again, that result against Illinois, depending on how that goes, Maryland could be feeling really, really good about themselves walking in to Assembly Hall on Sunday afternoon. And there's some familiar names on this team, right? Guys that you're going to know very, very well. Derik Queen, their leading scorer. He's the center. You know that name, don't you? How about Jacoby Gillespie, the guard? You know that name. Julian Reese. Yep, he's the star forward for them and the Terps. So you're talking about a 15 points per game scorer, a 14 points per game scorer, a 13 points per game scorer. And there's 2 more that average double digits. They're a 5-man team. Other than that, the drop-off is pretty significant. But if you can't stop their 3 guards, a forward, and a big boy center, you're in trouble. And I think the thing to look for here is how much more does Malik Reneau play? How much more involved is Malik Reneau? How much healthier is Malik Reneau from a Wednesday night game to what is now a Sunday afternoon game? Is he going to improve that much in those few days? Played, I believe, 11 minutes in that game in the midweek against Northwestern and didn't really do a whole lot. Missed all of his shots, grabbed a couple of boards, and that was it. So can he be any sort of a factor in this game? Maryland's also a team. You start looking around, they rebound the ball well, they share the ball pretty well, and they shoot it pretty good too at 36% as a team. You have to find shooters. You have to play peanut butter defense, right? Stick on them. Don't get lost. Don't get back screened. Don't get down screened. Don't get double screened if you're Indiana and just lazily fight your way through or even go under that screen. You've got to hit it. You've got to hit it hard because these guys are good enough to either rise and fire or get to the bucket and lay it in or just yam it in your face because they are high flying, man. This Maryland team, they're a lot of fun to watch. They really, really are. And I think they're going to be dangerous down the stretch in Big Ten play. And I also think they're a team that if they make the NCAA tournament, which at this point, I don't know why they wouldn't, they're a team that nobody wants to mess with. And here's the final game of this stretch that I've talked about for Indiana, where this is no easy game, but it gets all the more difficult after this. Your 5 out of your next 6 games are against top 25 teams currently as the AP poll stands. The lone team is UCLA, who was ranked the last time they played this Maryland team. So you're playing the best of the best in the Big Ten starting right now on Sunday afternoon. Last time we were home, we heard the Boo Birds. We heard Fire Woodson chants that started by the student section and just kind of expanded to the rafters of Assembly Hall. Will that be the case Sunday? I'm sure it will, honestly. And, man, that's a tough spot to be in. If you're Mike Woodson and this coaching staff, if you're the players, if you're this program, man, that's got to be tough, knowing in your head there's a pretty good chance that the fans are going to be going against you in your home gym. And I will continue to say that I am one that does not want the team to lose just so the head coach will get fired. I don't subscribe to that line of thinking. I don't. If that's how it plays out, then that's how it plays out, and we'll go from there. But I'm not going to actively cheer against this team because I don't think the head coach is good at his job. that's the case. I don't think he's good. I don't think he's qualified anymore. I don't think he's the right man for the job. But it doesn't mean I want him to fail. It doesn't mean I want this team and this program to suffer even more than we already have. I think that's a toxic way to think. I really do. And so the Hoosiers got to find a way to overcome literally all of that and beat one of the most talented teams in the Big Ten in Maryland. If you win this game, you survive another day. You live to see the next week if you're Mike Woodson in Indiana. If you lose this game, it's going to be dark. It's going to be bad. And depending on how you lose it, if it's close or if it's in blowout fashion, things could get pretty ugly there at Assembly Hall on Sunday afternoon and moving into your next 6 games, where if you don't win this game Sunday, you may not win any of those 6 games on your schedule coming up. And at that point, Mike Woodson may not even survive that stretch. Again, the names you need to know: Derik Queen, Jacoby Gillespie, and Julian Reese. The top 3 scorers: a center, a guard, and a forward. So you look at Umar Ballo, you look at Mackenzie Mbako, possibly Malik Renew, and whoever they put on Gillespie as the guard. It could be Miles Rice. It could be Trey Galloway. Heck, it could be Cannon Carlisle or even Anthony Leo, who got the start the other night. Whoever it is, you better be ready to run and you better be ready to go, because Maryland's going to give you everything you've got. They will want it more than you. Can Indiana overcome that? Can Indiana come out with effort and with energy and get open on offense, get some good looks, and you're going to have to knock them down. And if you can do those things, you've got a decent chance. If not, could be a long afternoon inside of Assembly Hall. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Hoosiers. Thank you so much again for being here, truly making this your first listen or your first watch every single day. Enjoy the game this weekend. NFL playoffs are on as well. And Indiana basketball on Sunday. We'll have a full breakdown for you coming up next week. Appreciate again Brian Smith joining us on our football segments as well. Have a great weekend, Hoosier fans. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll talk to you later.